Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. My name is Darshan Kulkarni. The reason I do this is it's my mission to help patients trust the product they depend on. I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you have an interest in an FDA regulated company or its products, this is the podcast for you. Today's podcast is about regulatory affairs. It's about getting a product through the market, through the FDA, getting it to market. So if you are a regulatory officer or a CEO or someone in the C-suite and trying to go, you know what, how do you bring a product to market? You probably want to listen on this conversation. If you are a vendor and you're going, you know what, regulatory always says no, just like legal does. So you want to understand why we're saying no. If you are in sales, we are, again, the regulatory is always a person going no, but there's a reason for it. So these are all the reasons you want to tune in, hear more about it. Today's guest, our guest today is the Senior Vice President of Global Regulatory Affairs, Quality and Operational Excellence at Syros Pharmaceuticals based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. In his own words, his business card is now a brochure. So welcome everyone. Thanks for having you on. Thanks for coming on, Ashley. Good to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to it.
So Ashley, talk to me a little bit about what does someone who basically controls, well, what I think of as a very significant portion of a emerging global pharma company do? What is your role as SVP of Global Regulatory Affairs, Quality and Operational Excellence?
Sure, it's quite a long title. It's been added to over time, but in essence, and I'll depart from the stop sign idea a little bit. I think regulatory used to be the stop sign. We were very much considered the stop sign, telling everybody what they could not do. I really see regulatory as a GPS, because there is always a way to get through to navigate to where you want to be with a product. It just, sometimes takes some innovation, some time, it takes some strategic thinking, some innovation. So there's always a way. It just is not always the simplest path. So really in my role, I'm tasked with a number of things, but in the regulatory space, to make sure that we at Syros have thought about the most innovative, the most efficient regulatory strategy to bring our products to patients. And that we've done that in a compliant way, and that we've engaged with the regulators at the appropriate time along that journey, so that we can be as efficient and effective as possible in bringing those products to the market as soon as we can, to benefit patients who desperately need them.
Now, you talk about, so I'm going to start with a basic question that you just raised, which was regulatory's role is evolving. It's gone from being a traffic cop saying no to the GPS saying here's how, which I think is great and very true. Most of the policing functions within companies have gone to a more collaborative approach, including the FDA, where the FDA used to be the traffic cop saying no. Now they're saying we recognize that we need to evolve, and hope, and luckily that means that organizations can evolve as well. But when you're talking about choosing between innovation, time, and money, it reminds me of that of the typical consultant role. They say you can have it quick, you can have it fast, or you can have it done right. Which one would you choose? In the same way, when you're choosing something in your role between innovation, time, and cash, how do you choose?
It's always a balancing act. And it's a consideration for all companies, but particularly for small companies who are, non-commercial and have IPO'd and really have to take into deep consideration their cash burn and really get the most value out of their programs. Every dollar they spend in development has to drive them towards getting that product to patients and onto the market. So I think it's really, when we talk about innovation, it's innovation in thinking and innovation in decision making, and really having robust decision making to kill programs early if you need to. I mean, that's equally important to bringing programs to market. And we know in this industry that not every drug that starts clinical trials is going to get through onto the market. But it's important to make sure that you are as efficient as possible and driving and focused on the patients that can drive the greatest need, the greatest benefit from your molecule. And that's where we see the continued evolution and continued increase in the utilization of biomarker technologies and that whole space of personalized medicine, because we are looking to bring these medicines as quickly as possible to the patients who can benefit most from them. So when we think about that efficiency, we're looking for opportunities to provide the evidence of safety and efficacy that is required for market approval, provided in the right patient population, and as efficiently as possible to bring that medicine to them, without wasting time or energy or patients resource on other options or other pathways that are not as efficient, or that may not lead to where we're trying to bring the medicine.
So it's interesting you talk about innovation in this role of, well, you do need to be price sensitive and you need to be cash sensitive. I guess some of the things that pop out for me is this idea of when you have a global product that you're going to raise, and as I see Cyrus is raising, I kind of what I find fascinating is you have a very global background. You've some of the conversations I've had about you or had with you have talked to me a little bit about, you're informed by your experiences in Singapore and in Australia and the like. And I guess, how does that play a role in how you see bringing innovative products like personalized medicine products into those communities? Now, obviously, Singapore and Australia are significantly advanced countries, but a lot of the neighboring countries are not. How do you make those decisions, where you're going to go, what you're going to take, and which products you're going to kill for which countries?
Absolutely. So I think that my philosophy, by and large, is that drug development should be global, unless there's a specific reason for it not to be, and that may be related to the disease prevalence. Some diseases are only prevalent in certain regions or certain patient groups. So and that definitely varies across the globe. But by and large, for, let's take an oncology indication that is prevalent, everywhere, say lung cancer, we should be developing, global strategies to bring these medicines to patients as quickly as possible to everybody. Now, that has its own challenges, of course, because each country has its own regulatory system and requirements. But that is really part of the key role for the regulatory professional, is to try and work out how to best harmonize those requirements and develop a strategy that can accommodate the differing requirements. And they're not always vastly different, but those key differences can have an impact on the development strategy. But taking my time that I spent in Singapore leading regulatory for the Asia Pacific region, that was a large part of my role, was to work out how to integrate the requirements of the Asia Pacific regional countries into global development programs, so that we could reduce the drug lag, and drug lag being the time difference between approval in, say, the US and Europe and approval in the rest of world markets. And so that was our ultimate goal, and we were able to do that, I think, successfully by really having early interaction with the global teams to bring those elements and considerations for the APAC markets earlier into the development program, and also interactions at the right time with the local agencies to make sure that they came along for the ride with us in developing that, because it's also an important factor, getting back to the idea of regulatory being the GPS and regulatory agencies, not also converting from the stop sign to more of a GPS approach. I really truly see it as a partnership. So, the folks at FDA, for instance, they get up in the morning, they brush their teeth, and they go to work, and they have a drive and a goal to provide access to new medicines to patients, to their constituents. So they have, we can partner in that, because we both have the same ultimate aim, but we have slightly different viewpoints, if you like, or perspectives on what we need to achieve. But taking that relationship as a partnership with the ultimate goal of bringing innovative medicines to patients, I feel is the best way to approach that. And if you have that mindset in all of the dialogue you have with any agency, you will definitely get a better outcome at the end of the day during those discussions.
So you talk about partnering with global agencies, which I think is obviously our eventual goal. But when you're doing that, first of all, what you have to deal with is price sensitivity, especially when you're talking about the Asia Pacific region, you're talking about South America. That becomes a major issue. Also, I mean, let's be honest. You've got price cap issues to deal with in Europe as well. So when you're considering this whole process, how do you make a decision on yes, we want to bring our drug, our medicines, our treatments across the globe to, you know what, we're going to have to curtail our program in these other countries because, quite honestly, they just won't reimburse us for what we need for this product to actually exist. How do you make that decision as to where you're going to introduce it and where you won't? And then we'll get into just how do you sort of direct things, if you will.
So I would say it's beyond sort of my scope, the pricing and marketing decisions. So I wouldn't probably be qualified to comment in that regard as to how to decide the commercial rollout. Other than I think again, personally, I would think that we should try and commercialize in every market possible. But again, that's a sort of a slightly different perspective. But from a regulatory and drug development perspective, I think we should absolutely take a global approach. But we also have to consider the nuances of the different markets. And so when we develop a global drug development program and strategy, we look at what trials, particularly what pivotal trials do we need, and what evidence do we need to get from those trials to demonstrate clearly the safety and efficacy of that product, such that it could be approved at the NDA stage. And then we take into consideration what additional evidence beyond that core program, what additional evidence might a particular market need to satisfy their own local regulatory requirements. The most obvious within Asia Pacific are places like China, Japan, and Korea, who want to see some level of rigor applied to consideration of local ethnic sensitivity in drug development, which is part of the ICH guidelines. And so there's a process for doing that, and rightly so, because diseases can manifest differently in different populations, and also drugs can have varied levels of efficacy and safety in different populations. That's been shown previously. And so as a result of that, those markets have requirements for maybe a more in-depth PK/PD analysis in the local population, or all the way through to inclusion of a certain percentage of local patients into development or separate studies. And so we really have to consider all of those factors in building the most efficient development program. Now, some other markets don't have that local requirement, but they may have a requirement that the program is developed and approved in one of the reference markets before they will allow the NDA to be filed in their own country. And so again, it's about staging all of those factors into a coherent regulatory strategy that can most rapidly bring this molecule to the greatest number of patients globally.
So we have a little bit of a ringer question for you. I don't know if you can see it. This is from someone you might know. Tatiana Wanderer asks, given your experience helping global teams think through APAC regulatory submission needs, would you feel comfortable sharing some actionable tips or things U.S. teams should keep in mind to enable easier APAC submissions?
Okay, great question. So I think it really does relate to understanding the nuances and those nuances are driven by specific local requirements in each country. And so having those considerations made upfront in the development program really helps you down the track to make sure you have, at the same time you're providing your pivotal evidence for instance, the US or Europe, you have also at that time generated the evidence that you need and the additional analyses or studies that you need to file in the APAC markets. So it's really the earlier you can do that, the less you need to repeat work that has already been done. And so then you can drive, even if you need to wait for a reference market approval, you already have that evidence ready and waiting to facilitate that NDA. And I think it's important if I think specifically about my experience in moving from an APAC focus to a global focus, and based in the US, I think it's really just an understanding of the global teams and the folks based in the US, understanding of some of those requirements, because unless you're working in that on a daily basis, you don't necessarily have visibility. But for a well-rounded regulatory professional, I think you should try and open your experience and your understanding to the global landscape, and at least bring those factors forward for the development team as early as possible. And they can't always be integrated, immediately, but at least you have visibility of those, and you can work out a stepwise plan to make sure you're being most efficient in your development program.
So, as part of the whole process of going into the Asia Pacific region, one of the things that really strikes me is and you've sort of highlighted this throughout your answers, the difference in the way the US is looking to move towards conducting many of the studies and the research programs, and global authorities who are still considering if this is the right path. And what I'm talking about and what I'm referring to is the idea of patient centricity. I think the EMA and the US are very much into the idea of it, while conversations I've had with countries in the Asia Pacific and a few South American countries have suggested that they're going, well, this isn't broken yet, why are we fixing it? So how do you address that difference? Or do you not need to when you sort of develop programs that consider both, if you will?
Yeah, that's a very good point to consider. I believe that when we think about patient centricity in clinical trials and issues around considering decentralization of clinical trials, I think that we globally, as an industry, we're going to have to take a stepwise approach. And some trials today will be still the traditional model, and I think as we move forward, we can move to more of a hybrid model. So potentially, you could see where the execution, the operational execution of the study, could be a mixture of the traditional, consolidated site approach and the decentralized approach. For me, really, the key consideration, if I'm wearing my quality hat, is ensuring that we have the appropriate quality oversight and the appropriate rigor and processes in place to maintain quality, regardless of how that study is operationally implemented.
So you're talking about this idea of a hybrid model. How do we get to that? Because the hottest thing right now, and you sort of got into the next question I wanted to get into, which was the idea of decentralized studies. Mm-hmm. And everyone's talking about them right now. It's the hottest thing since sliced bread. But I see the people mostly talking about it are in the innovation space and in the clinical trial innovation space. I'm seeing very little conversation around the actual sponsor, actual execution part of it, if that question makes sense. Is it an area of worry for you? And I'm not saying specifically Saros, but from the perspective of being in-house, is it still unproven and therefore a scary area to get into? Or is it the natural place we're going and we're just going to have to evolve and we don't want to be the first people in there? Like, what's your thought process around it?
I do think that to get to a well-rounded sort of decentralized model, it's going to take a lot of thought and a lot of infrastructure work, if you like, a process work on the sponsor side to make sure that your processes are robust and adapted to allowing a decentralized model. And I think that that, whilst philosophically makes perfect sense, and I am certainly all for, particularly from the perspective of patient access to clinical trials and equity in access, globally. So from that perspective, I can see that decentralized model certainly has its absolute benefits in achieving that aim. I think for sponsors and probably the degree of hesitance, I suppose, may vary depending on the maturity of the company, the size of the company, the resources that they have available to apply to preparing for a decentralized model. That probably varies, but I think it is definitely a worthy goal that we should all be heading towards, even in a stepwise manner. But to your point, I think that we have also, as an industry, somewhat been forced into adopting some of the decentralized measures. If you think purely the telemedicine, telehealth, even in our own internal environment, we have been forced into remote working, as a default, and we've adapted to that, and we've been able to be successful at that. Certainly, I think at Syros we have adapted that model for during the pandemic for functions that are not laboratory based, and we've been able to achieve our goals in that difficult environment. But I do think that the advent, getting back to the clinical trial space, the advent of the COVID pandemic really accelerated the utilization of telehealth and other digital options or virtual options for patient management. And I would like to see industry and FDA and other regulators really learn from that, harness what we've learned, harness what are the best parts of that, and move forward in the future to continue the development into the decentralized and digitization of clinical trial space.
So many questions to ask. I'm sorry. I'm trying to hold myself back. Let me start with one of the basic ones, which is when you're doing a global clinical study and you're planning a global regulatory program. One of the biggest things, and this is almost old at this point as I say it, but I think it has a new meaning now, in that probably about 2 years ago, 2018, early 2019, maybe late 2019, there was a whole conversation about, we're going to start moving away from Europe, because with GDPR in there, we don't know whether we can move data, and there's been a whole discussion about does the data have to be stored in Europe, or can we do the studies there and then get the data here to actually submit to the FDA? We don't have the appropriate, the US data shield doesn't exist anymore, blah, 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 blah. Then COVID happened. And we went, I guess we meet the patients where they are. And then new laws came in and said, not only do you need to meet the patients where they are, you need to do it in a way that's still compliant, because you have your remote data sharing and remote working processes that come into play as well. So how has patient privacy played a role in the regulatory program you're developing? And has that changed which countries you get into? It's sort of a simpler way of asking that question.
I think for us it hasn't changed. We are driven by developing the most robust regulatory strategy to bring our products to market as efficiently as possible. Obviously, in the execution of that, if you are looking at markets in Europe, you have to take into consideration the GDPR. And that's something that I think every company and in this industry is going to have to face in one way or another. But I think that really should not, to my mind, prevent us from going forward and prevent us from developing in Europe, even if it has some challenges. I think it's still incumbent upon us as an industry to bring forward medicines as widely as possible to the greatest market. And then, if I think from the perspective of execution of the studies in the most efficient way and as quickly as possible, to get that evidence pivotal evidence for NDA, there is no way that we cannot conduct studies in Europe. We have to have a global program. It's the reality. But having said that, there's also, coming from experience in APAC, I think we should not underestimate the ability of the APAC markets to provide great high quality clinical trial participation and execution. And also there are vast numbers of patients in need who could benefit from our medicines and benefit from the opportunity to access clinical trials. So I think we all, again, back to the global approach, and it works in many ways. It provides earlier access to medicines and to clinical trials for patients who may not otherwise have that opportunity. And the flip side being that you then have access to greater numbers of patients who are in need, who could contribute to your clinical trial data and potentially speed up your development programs. So to me, it's a win-win. The execution part around GDPR, it remains challenging, but I don't think it's something that is insurmountable.
Fascinating. And it's good to hear that from someone who's actually in the trenches doing the work, doing the strategy component. Because a lot of the CROs that I spoke to said that the conversations had shifted. But again, I haven't spoken to them in the same way since COVID went live. So that may have played a demonstrable change or different result in a demonstrable change. Let me ask you this last question, which was, you're developing a multi-billion-dollar set of products, a development program, if you will, around these drugs. You then land up in a country like India. You land up in a country like Brazil. And they talk about the TRIPS agreement. Are you familiar with the TRIPS agreement, by the way, before I go down that? Oh, you are?
I'm no IP lawyer, but I am familiar with it.
Okay. So one of the big components of the TRIPS agreement, as you know, is the compulsory licensing element. And the US has started talking about that as well. Is it disheartening or is it reality? As you start preparing for a program, as a company is spending the money saying, I want to help patients, and then land up in a scenario where a country might say, you know what, we have an urgent or emergent need, and we're just going to create a compulsory license for this product. So how does that play in your strategy, or it doesn't, and you just deal with it if it comes in its eventuality you have to consider?
Yeah, so I guess it's my own philosophy on that is that I can see the point of view of the country itself and the authority there in terms of wanting to provide the most cost-effective options for their constituents, their population and patients. But on the other hand, the damage that can do to innovation, and I would not want those decisions to drive innovation and drive new products away from those markets, because that would be doing a disservice to patients. What I think is key here is to really fully understand the cost of development, the cost of innovation, and for there to be a wider understanding of how development works, and the reason why things, medicines, can be expensive is because of the work that needs to go into developing them, the information that's required. And it's really important to understand the difference in thinking between, a chemical itself, a molecule itself, the chemical basis, okay, can be commoditized, but the information that enables the safe and effective use of that medicine is what we are striving for in clinical trials. And that is expensive to obtain, and sort of deserves some sort of recognition and reward for that. And so I think that the more, if we're successful in doing that, then we're able to channel those funds into developing more medicines to help patients. So it is a difficult balance, of course, because you've got to consider the economic or the socioeconomic factors around some of these markets who are considering implementing compulsory licensing.
Very cool. I have several more questions around innovation. I'd love to sort of pull you into them, but we're sort of running a little bit out of time. So before we continue, are there any questions you want to ask the audience?
So, I mean, I'm interested because, no doubt there are a number of regulatory professionals listening in.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in multiple perspectives. What are your perspectives, particularly around the three key high priority elements of regulatory modernization that, for instance, FDA, if you were speaking with FDA and you could give them your top three points for modernization or streamlining of regulatory processes, what would they be?
Very cool. If you were talking to the FDA and you could explain to them the three methods of modernizing the FDA, streamlining the process, what would they be? That's the question. Let me see if I can answer it from my perspective. I think my big ones would be to keep going down the risk-based approach that the FDA is doing. I think my big concern with the way the FDA is executing it is I'm not 100% convinced that they are looking at safety as much as I'd like them to look at. Maybe that's a personal preference thing, but my experience is that the FDA is appropriate in considering a risk-based model, but I'm not getting clarity. The second thing is I think they need to do a better job in demonstrating transparency and sort of providing transparency on their regulatory decision-making process. You're seeing a lot of, here's the stuff we looked at, which is great. And this is what the NDA could look at, NDA contained, which is great. And you're seeing that from global authorities. What would be really useful is to say what was dispositive. What made you, the FDA, make a decision one way or the other? Because that education would teach other innovators, other healthcare providers, other sponsors to go, here's what the next step looks like. And this is where we want to invest our resources. Obviously, you want to still talk to the FDA, learn from the FDA. But if you had, like in the legal system, you have decisions and there's tons of evidence that's provided, but the judge in the end says, here's what I looked at, and here's the model I followed. That answer is not something that I have seen the FDA do. Have you seen it from any global authority?
Only insofar as what is released publicly, the NDA
Right.
reviews, the EPA in Europe and so on. Yes, but I agree with you that would be extremely helpful. Almost, you have the taking the judgment, and that type of in-depth understanding from the reviewer's perspective.
Yeah.
Even if it was applied to therapeutic areas, even if it wasn't necessarily product specific, because that can run them into challenges around confidentiality. But more of a conversation around products, therapeutic area thinking, class thinking. Yes, absolutely.
I would challenge you on that, though, Ashley. I'm not sure that it need. I recognize your perspective on confidentiality. However, I think that there are ways to. I mean, your data is already going public in many, many ways. So it's not, and you can always choose to redact. You already have teams doing that. So if that's true, what you're really getting is the regulatory thought process that would be relatively unredacted. The company data itself would remain redacted. So I think it's possible to do. But your point, is a good one, which is it might be a compromise position, saying we'd like more of an understanding and more of a conversation that's available. That is, quite honestly, what would be really useful for me or for us or for any of us in the industry is holding the FDA accountable in a certain way. And what I mean by that is not just the transparency, but saying you decided this product based on these factors and this product based on these factors. They're both in the same drug class. Why are you deciding these two things differently? And I recognize the fact that every drug is unique, but it cannot be willy-nilly, which I have no idea if it is or it isn't, because no one does outside the FDA. I have a feeling that there will, by definition, be a certain amount of subjectiveness, one of those two. But I'm not convinced that it cannot be minimized, because I think you want that to be an objective result. And I think that the FDA needs to make my third point would be I think the FDA needs to make do a better job allowing for. I mean, I have several more, but the FDA needs to do a better job allowing for engagement using social media. The FDA goes through its, and I'm thinking really at this moment around enforcement, but you'll see a lot of enforcement strategies where the FDA will simply go, we're going to send you a warning letter about a social media post. Well, the social media post was 4 days ago. There have been 4.5 million likes on it. And you're responding to me 4 days later, 15 days later, and that's super fast in FDA terms. What would be really cool is the FDA sending out a tweet going, you sure you want to do this? I'm not saying anything more, but you sure you want to do this? And that should give a company pause and have an assessment at that point. But the idea that we're going to wait, and I'd love to see if you think any of these ideas were completely off from left field, but that's just my initial thought process.
No, that's some very good points. I definitely think that around the reviews, there could be a compromise position where we have a little more narrative to accompany the NDA review for others to understand the thinking of the reviewer. And I agree, there is a balance to be struck between the company confidential information. So perhaps we can it could be further developed to provide a bit more information. Absolutely. On the social media aspect, I'm honestly not really sure.
Fair enough.
To give that more thought, but yeah, definitely in the review, and one that came to mind for me and was touched upon in some of the bio regulatory discussions that I've been party to, is also looking at ways to improve the FDA meeting structure. Mm-hmm. So we have a type A, B, and C, but is there some level of innovation that we could have there which might both free up some of FDA's resources and also make it maybe a few more different options for meeting types that are not quite so structured, and increase maybe frequency of engagement, which on one hand could utilize more FDA resources, but on the other hand, it's really spreading that conversation out over a bit longer period of time. So I think that could be useful. And definitely there's been a lot of innovation at FDA, and I think that that innovation, to my mind, has been the pinnacle of that has been in the oncology space, the oncology and hematology space. And so it would be interesting to see how FDA as an institution could learn from what has been done in the oncology space and try and filter some of those aspects out to other therapeutic areas. That would be really, really helpful, I think, for those areas also, and bringing innovative medicines across the board for all therapeutic areas.
One of the things that I found most distressing about the FDA, because I somehow in my head hold them to a higher standard than even pharma, is that they don't learn from each other within the FDA. And a really good example of that is, I think, a lot of the and quite honestly, some of it's driven by regulation, some of it's driven by laws. But to the extent you have a certain amount of wiggle room, I think the FDA I would say has had a relatively successful practice or regulatory scheme around medical devices. And can that be adopted for drugs? Do we really need to go down the exact processes we go through with the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 process? Or are some of the lessons from medical devices applicable to drugs? And you're seeing that in many, many ways. For example, do we always need to have superiority studies, or can we do non-inferiority studies more? Can we do proof of concept, or would that be hugely problematic, and why? Those questions have never been explored. We've sort of all taken the position that this is what it is and let's keep moving, which is accurate, but that's not innovation.
That's a fair point.
Let's ask a couple of rapid fire questions. You ready?
Okay, shoot.
Okay. What's an accomplishment you're most proud of?
Well, I think that for me, what I'm most proud of accomplishing is to develop and lead teams of talented people. Really, that's what drives me every day, is the people that I work with and the people on my team particularly, and enabling an environment where they can succeed and do their best work. So every time they achieve something great, I feel a sense of pride, and that's what really gets me up in the morning.
Very cool. When are you most inspired?
when my teams achieve and when we are able to bring new medicines to patients. Absolutely.
Very cool. Who is your hero or heroine and why?
Wow, that's a tough one. Okay,
I'm
gonna have to say my wife.
Oh, okay. Why your wife?
Yeah, because she is the linchpin of our family. We have 4 children, and so she keeps the house running and keeps everything running smoothly. Keeps the kids happy and in school, and it keeps everything and inspires me every day because of how she's able to do all of this that needs to be done. And I often say I have the easy job, really, in terms of in the house. So yeah, she inspires me every day, and I'm so proud of her.
If that doesn't get you brownie points for saying that in front of 12,000 people, I'm not sure what does. How do you define success?
It's a journey. It's a journey, not a destination. So success really is about setting goals and achieving them in a way that balances. So if you think about everything we do if you could map it into a triangle, you have results, process, and relationships, and you have to maximize all 3. You can get results and destroy relationships or not follow process, but when you maximize all 3 of those components, that is success, and that's what will lead to long-term sustained success.
Very cool. What was the best vacation you've ever taken?
Wow. I think best vacation I've ever taken, I'm going to say our honeymoon. So we took a trip around Europe on a bus tour. I got to experience multiple countries in Europe, great food, great people, lots of culture, and that was an awesome experience.
I'm even more impressed by your wife that she took a bus tour on her honeymoon.
It was a high class bus tour.
Oh, okay. I've done buses in Europe.
No. This was business class seats on a bus.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Because I have done the worst bus tours in Europe, but yeah, fair enough.
I can give you suggestions.
What is the most fun you've had recently?
Most fun I've had recently. Look, during the pandemic, it's the most fun that I've had is in the work from home environment, and not having a long commute, which I really enjoy, is having more time to spend with my kids and my family, and spending a lot of outdoor time, particularly in the better weather, being able to finish work and then really get outside with the kids, play basketball, play sports, get outside with them and walk the dog or run around, do anything to enjoy that outside time. And this model that we find ourselves in, we've got to find some positives, out of the pandemic, and that has been the increased, quality time with the family.
Last question: if you were going to build a 2020 Mount Rushmore, who would be the first person on it and why?
Wow, that is a tough one. I'm going to say Vice President Kamala Harris.
Why?
Well, as the first female vice president, first African American and Indian, background vice president, she is making new ground, breaking new ground in many ways. And I just really admire the way she speaks and what she's trying to achieve. So I think she would be number 1 on there.
So no one's gone after the first lawyer, but then again, I think Abraham Lincoln may have that one. Fair enough. This was wonderful, Ashley. Thank you again. Let me do a quick recap. During this conversation, we start talking a little bit about regulatory as a GPS as opposed to a traffic cop. We spoke about the balance of innovation, time, and cash. We landed up discussing how do you appropriately engage with global regulators, and we didn't get a chance to explore this more, but I really want to talk about this, hopefully in our next conversation, on when do you kill a product. We spoke a little bit about patient-centricity and how that term is defined globally and how that changes. We then talked about local requirements, whether we're talking about varied efficacy requirements, varied safety requirements, varied testing requirements, and the like. We talked about which direction we're going with the context of hybrid regulatory schemes in the context of what you do in the U.S. versus what they expect in the U.S., what they're starting to expect in the U.S. versus where a lot of the rest of the world is. We talked a little bit about privacy requirements and remote working, and how a global planning scheme works out. Did I miss anything?
I think you caught all of that.
Perfect.
It's quite a conversation.
It was. And we should clarify, nothing in this podcast should be construed as legal, regulatory, or clinical advice of any kind. It's intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. For those of you who missed it, Ashley, where can they reach you?
They can reach me at apreston@ciros.com.
There you go. And if you like this podcast, please leave a comment. Please subscribe. You can find me on Darshan Talks on Twitter or go to our website at darshantalks.com. Thanks again, Ashley. Great to have you on.
Thank you very much.